Yes, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks to AWA for inviting me along today. Yeah. I was thinking about what to talk to you guys about today, and I quickly remembered what I call my immigration to Western Australia. I'm not originally from Western Australia. I'm known as someone from the East. It took me a while to understand that saying, but I've been here for over 10 years, and I know now that everyone is from the East who isn't from WA. And I thought about how I arrived here. And I thought it's a reasonably good story to share, talking about the extremes of Western Australia. I was living in Darwin for 3 years, and my lovely wife is Western Australian, born and bred, and we made the decision to immigrate back to Western Australia, and mainly because she had a real issue with the humidity. But the joke's on her, because since we've got back, Perth summers have become more and more humid. So she flew ahead of me, and I decided to ring my father, and I said, would you like to come for a road trip? We'll travel down the coast and have a bit of a holiday. Now, the year was 2006, and the month was March, and we left Darwin, and we got to Kununurra, and my father is a farmer, and he was particularly interested in the Ord River scheme, and he wanted to catch a barramundi. And we stayed one day too long, because what was behind us was the remnants of ex-severe tropical cyclone Larry, which devastated Innisfail only a few days earlier, and then formed into a monsoonal low travelling across the north of Australia. And when it got to Kununurra, it decided to do a bit of circle work over Kununurra. And I had never experienced rain like that, and I'd just come off the back of 3 wet seasons in Darwin. The amount of water was phenomenal. We got stuck there for 10 days. At one stage, I believe there was about 7 metres of water over the top of the Great Northern Highway. So it was an interesting experience. And my father did catch a barramundi, so that was good. And once the roads opened, we travelled down, and in the meantime, after that period, that low had entered back out into the Indian Ocean and then formed into Cyclone Glenda, which was a Category 5 storm, and it came across the coast at around Port Hedland, and we were in the Pilbara by that stage. So we got affected again. And we were driving through, when the roads opened, we were in a full drive, but we were driving through kilometres of highway that were under half a metre of water. And if your father's anything like mine, and he wants to have a drive, and you've got a sunroof, make sure you tell him to slow down before he reaches a flooded waterway. So we eventually got to Perth, remembering it's 2006, and we arrived here, and it was sunny, it was beautiful, and I didn't see rain again for 12 months. Because 2006 was the second driest year on record, only by about 5 mil, I think, to 1914. So we had about 430 mil of rain for the year. So that was the quintessential journey for me into Western Australia, and seeing just how extreme this state is. To go from, I think in the 2-day period, we had more rain in Kununurra than Perth got for the entire year. I think we got about 800 mil for the week we were there. So it certainly is an extreme state. I often think about where my passion for water management and water conservation comes from, and it's only recently, as I've gotten older and arguably a little bit wiser, that I'm able to articulate my upbringing. And where it came from was this place here in the Adelaide Hills. So this is a place called Scott Creek. It's about 40 minutes from Adelaide, and I was a 5th generation Nelson to be born on this farm. And it was a dairy farm up until 87, and then my father was one of the first people to go into organic market gardening in the mid-80s. Now, my lessons that I learnt about water all came from this place. So we didn't have skiing water, they still don't have skiing water, and I learnt what I call 4 fundamental lessons from growing up on this farm. And the first one was that water must come from alternative sources and multiple sources. And on the farm we had three sources of water. We had groundwater, we had rainwater, and we had water from Scott Creek. We had about 1 kilometre of Scott Creek on our property. And what you also learned was this concept of fit for purpose water. So depending on where the water source came from determined its end use. So in the house, the rainwater was used for drinking, hygiene, sanitary and cleaning. The bore water was used for the gardens, growing crops and feed. And the creek was used to provide water for the pasture for the cattle or the dairy cows, depending on what we had there. And so my first fundamental lesson was multiple sources. You can't rely on one source of water. The second lesson was about championing and having a champion of water and managing water, and that was my father. And the efforts he went to make sure that we had water was significant. The first paid job I had for getting pocket money was looking after the fire pump that used to provide us with water out of the creek for the cattle. So I'd go down after school and I'd start the pump and I'd get $1, I think. And that was the first lesson I learnt. My father used to get up every morning. We had these two, at the time they would have been 80 years old, single cylinder positive displacement bore pumps. And we used to go and start them with the hand crank, and he showed me how to start them and turn them off because he was future-proofing. He was doing succession planning because water was the most important thing at that place. Without water, you had nothing. So Dad would show me how to do this, but then Dad taught me about innovation because when the technology became available, he bought himself a solar tracking system with a submersible pump and retrofitted bores. And at the time, the Bureau of Ag did a story on my dad, and they worked out from him getting up every morning and every night turning off these bores, he'd covered the distance from Adelaide to London 2 times over return. So it requires effort. We learned about managing the network of pipes and all the work that happens with distributing water now in a city. But one of the other lessons we learned was water efficiency, and that was taken care of by my mother in the house. And don't worry, Dad was always the last person to get the bath water because he was always the dirtiest. So everything that's happening in Cape Town now, we were sort of doing and have always done on this property. And probably the biggest lesson I learnt growing up on this property was never be apathetic and never be complacent about water. I knew I could go around that property, I could turn on any tap, I knew exactly where that water was coming from. I knew more importantly how it got there and the efforts you needed to make sure it continues to be there. So I was very fortunate to get that upbringing. And so now that's why I'm obsessed with water, and I'm obsessed with weather. So is my father. So although it was a challenge driving to Western Australia, it was quite enjoyable. Just a couple of things, bringing it back to Western Australia. Those of you who have been involved working with the Department of Water on their plan, looking at a Perth population to 3.5 million, we recently went to a couple of workshops, and there was 2 key messages that came out of that for me. The first one is that, and not a lot of people surprisingly know, that over 70% of all the water used in the Perth metropolitan area, Perthville, comes from groundwater, and that's either through licensed bores or domestic bores. So, and a lot of it is for non-potable use. So when we talk about securing water in the future for Western Australia, we really have 2 fundamental sides to that argument. One is potable water. A lot of work's gone into securing potable water. It still has some challenges, but I believe where the major challenges lie is in the non-potable water supply. And the other big one was based on the current unconstrained application of water. There's a 53% supply-demand assumed by a population of 3.5 million. So we need to do something to ensure that we, mitigate that demand management. And one of the things we need to really start looking at is how we resource water innovation. And I'll give a disclaimer, these are my views and no one else's and my opinions, but over working in local government for over 10 years, I look at 2 of the fundamental challenges facing local government, And in my opinion, one of them is waste management moving forward, and this is not just this is regional, and water management, which is obviously worldwide. But of those two issues, only one of them enjoys a central management system, and it's heavily regulated. There's a lot of mandate around how we deal with waste. And if you look at a business unit for waste management, typically in local government, you'll have a waste manager, you'll have a coordinator, you'll have supervisors, you'll have a lot of revenue and a lot of resources to manage that issue. Water is a fragmented management model in local governments. So you have your irrigation team looking at what I call the groundwater bank, dealing with the extraction or the withdrawals from the bank. You have the environmental team looking at trying to improve your waterways. You'll have your development team approving applications for drainage and how that's used. But no one sits above it. It's all disconnected, it's all fragmented. So in order to deal with that demand management that we're facing, we need to start having a management model, and I'm talking about local government because that's what I live and breathe, to deal with it seriously and resource it, and so that we can have the time and the money to come up with the innovation to deal with these issues. And it's not about building a fancy bit of gear. A lot of it is education. But when you've got a fragmented management model, that's very difficult. Because what we face as professionals in the water industry is we do face a lot of apathy depending on the weather. And we do face a lot of, I guess, complacency depending on the weather. And it's what we call the hydrogeological cycle, just to finish with, and you've probably seen it before. But so we get rain, apathy, drought, awareness, concern, panic, then we get rain. Hopefully. So we're dealing with changing the perception so the public's aware that we're looking towards the long term, not year to year. We need to look at the population by mid-century at 3.5 million. Can we sustain the number of domestic bores and the current usage that we're dealing with? And that's a challenge, those sorts of things. But it's a wonderful industry to work in. There's some wonderful people in this room, and I've had a challenging project with the Managed Net for Recharge over the 8 years. And I used to show a photo of me before I started the project, and then one recently when I was in hospital, but I don't want to scare anyone. So. But what I firmly believe in, and will always believe in, is open innovation. So I will share everything I've done with all local governments and governments alike. It's about improving the process. And one good thing is we are in a recession-free industry. So moving forward, that is good. And look, I hope you enjoy the day. You've got some wonderful presentations to look forward to. And I thank you very much